Are you a perfectionist or a people pleaser? Are you working long and exhausting hours on the road to burnout? Well, if you are, you're going to want to stay online and listen to this podcast about perfectionism and how we overcome it. Now, I feel fully equipped to be able to speak about this because I am a recovering perfectionist.
Hello and welcome to Brave Conversations. I'm your host, Sheila V. This podcast is all about helping you get brave, courageous, and confident to make real and lasting changes in your life so that, yes, you are living your truth. I'm here to help you navigate your spiritual awakening, to guide you how to heal from trauma in your past, and to manifest the life that you know you deserve. You are powerful, you are divine, and I'm here to remind you that you can achieve anything that you want in your life. I am a transformation coach, a spiritual teacher, a business mentor, a speaker, an author, and a badass brave woman. And I am obsessed with women bravely and courageously showing up to live their life with no apologies. And I cannot wait to get into today's episode with you.
In most of my coaching, at some point with my clients, I'll need to address perfectionism. And so, what exactly is perfectionism? Let's start with a definition before I get into all the qualities and the traits and how it impacts our life. And then finally, I'm going to come to a bit of a solution, tactics and strategies to address perfectionism. Okay. So, what is perfectionism? Perfectionism, the way it presents in my life and my clients' lives, it's this unrelenting need to get things right all the time. It's an inability to forgive ourselves if we make a mistake, regardless of how small it is. It's a real fear of people seeing our flaws and judging us for them. It's also the fear of being mediocre, the fear of being average. These are kind of the ways I would describe perfectionism and how it can kind of show up in our life. And as you're listening to this, with me, I started to tackle my perfectionism when I started to diagnose it. I started to diagnose myself first. And that's always the first way we start to address anything in our life that we want to change. We self-diagnose ourselves and then we say, okay, we get present to the impact it's having on our life. And then we start to say, okay, I'm going to make some changes, mindset changes, emotional changes, physical changes, spiritual changes to move our life in a new direction. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of this podcast talking about diagnosing perfectionism and kind of why it's such a problem in our lives, especially for women that are A-type women, entrepreneurs, women that are senior leaders, executives, because it takes us out of the game of life. It took me out of the game of life, and I'm going to describe why. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is why are we perfectionists and why is it such a hard thing to overcome? And the reason why perfectionism is so hard to overcome is because we're rewarded for being perfectionists. Society gives us gold medals. We get awards. We get shiny certificates. We get pulled up as being employee of the year sometimes if we're a perfectionist. We get a lot of positive feedback when we do exceptionally well. Okay. One of the underlying currents and drivers of perfectionism, and it's no shock to you, is social media. We're getting a window into people's lives, a curated version, and all we do is compare our imperfect life to perfectionism out there. A Harvard study has shown that perfectionism has increased by staggering 33% in 10 years. So we're all affected by this in some way or another. And when we tackle perfectionism, I've found life can start to really unravel in miraculous ways. We can start to become so much more productive and really step into our life purpose. So let's come back to how has it served us? We're perfectionists because it served us. So basically, we get positive feedback. It lifts our self-esteem. We probably won awards. We're probably being called out for being exceptional at what we do in some ways. We might get addicted to having our self-esteem lifted by the need to constantly be perfect or well above average or performing at a very high level. And because of there's so much external validation we receive from being a perfectionist, it's very hard to tackle and overcome on our own, because the fundamental construct of our life that's keeping our life together and performing so well, that needs to be dismantled, right? It needs to be dismantled. And that's why out of all the addictions, being a workaholic can be one of the hardest ones to overcome, because we're actually rewarded by society when we're perfectionists. Now, the next point I want to make is perfectionism is universal. There's a continuum and we're all on it. So if anyone says they're not a perfectionist, that's probably not true, because anytime we're leveling up and we're trying to play bigger in the world, this little perfectionist bug will come up, and we'll try and get it right. So we might be a people pleaser working long and exhausting hours, right? Or we might be trying to start a new project, start up our side hustle business, start writing that book, start the podcast. We're trying to get things so perfect we don't ever start. So there's a continuum of perfectionism, and we're all on it. And it's a very universal story that we run. And the story is, I'm not enough. I'm not enough in some way. I may not be enough as a mother. I may not be enough as a boss. I may not be enough as a partner. I may not be pretty enough, smart enough. There's this an enough statement that starts in our childhood that, I guess, underneath is driving our need to be perfect. And fundamentally, someone who's a recovering perfectionist, I was actually desperately frightened of making a mistake. I was also frightened of being average. The thing with perfectionism, it starts in our childhood. And there's probably, and I'm going to talk about this next, where does it start? It does definitely start in our childhood. And there was probably events, or maybe several years of your childhood, where you were shown that love is conditioned and conditional on performing. So there's several scenarios this can play out in. One is, you might have had parents where academic success or sporting success or success in some ways meant you felt loved more. And if you weren't successful, that love was withdrawn. And you might have even been penalized. I was actually penalized. My dad was raised by his father, and his father was very heavy-handed with him. And my father was very heavy-handed with me from a very young age. And so I was penalized if I wasn't good, if I wasn't getting good marks. And it might sound really simple, like a lot of us experience this, and that's why it's kind of very insidious thing. A lot of parents put pressure on their kids, and they're doing that. They think they're doing the best, and they are doing the best. The challenge is as children, we might perform under that kind of pressure. And so it starts a cycle where parents put pressure on their kids, the kids perform, and thus they think it's working, this type of pressure. Now, what really is being bred is a child that will eventually have low self-esteem and derive self-esteem from doing well. So one of the root causes of perfectionism is that love is conditional. If I become a good girl or a good boy, if I do well, if I score goals in football, it means I'm lovable and worthy. It means that I'm perfect, and we get trained at a young age to drive our self-esteem by productivity. Okay, so that's one of the kind of hallmarks of how perfectionism started for many of us. Okay, so we were loved by obeying, achieving, complying, succeeding. So perfectionism, if you're familiar with attachment theory, it's an attachment story. We attach safely to our parents when we're being perfect, or we're archetypally being the good girl, good boy. And our parents, are, like I said, are doing their best. And they're not aware of the psychological impact that it's having on us. And that when we become adults, we kind of are bred to think that love is only going to come when we're very good. Another way this can manifest in our childhood is if you're humiliated when you make mistakes. So another way is where shame comes up if you are being a bad girl or bad boy. And if we're humiliated as a young child, that is a big emotion that can feel overwhelming. And for someone who's 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, being humiliated can feel like the worst thing in the world. We want to run, we want to hide. On David Hawkins' scale of consciousness, shame has the lowest frequency emotion. There's a feeling of wanting to die when we experience shame. And as a child that young, it can be overwhelming. So we grow up to be adults, never wanting to ever experience that level of shame ever again. So this can happen if you're just being, shamed or humiliated or scolded by a parent in your younger years. It could also come about if you're being compared to a sibling or someone else around you in school. So if you have an older sibling or even a younger sibling that's overperforming or performing better than you, it's called comparison shame. So comparison shame is a shame we experience when we compare ourselves, when we are compared to another person. Now we end up growing up to be adults and we end up taking on that role and we compare ourselves to other people. And again, that's kind of one of the branches of perfectionism, is where we must be perfect relative to people around ourselves. And quite frankly, that begins in our childhood. This is all learned behavior. So be kind to yourself. This is not your doing. It's all conditioned when you were a child. But that you grew up in a childhood home where you lack control. And the only way that you felt control over your environment was by performing. Or the only way you knew you weren't going to feel shame is by overextending yourself as a child and making sure you didn't make any mistakes, right? So I think just understanding where it begins in our childhood can be one of the best ways to start addressing perfectionism, because you think that is a child response. A lot of psychologists say the first reaction we have is the reaction of the child. The second reaction is the reaction of the adult. So when you're overcoming perfectionism, it's not like it goes away immediately. Definitely not. I still have to address it in my life. It doesn't have a hold on me now the way it used to. I still get triggered and I react and I feel shame come up if I make a mistake. And that's the reaction of the little girl within me. But the way I respond to that is how we address it. The adult comes forward and the adult makes the little child within me safe. Okay. So it's about addressing. So potentially in your journal, you might want to reflect on your childhood and think back, where was I taught that love is conditional? Or where was I compared to a sibling or someone else? And where was I shown that I needed to perform at such a high level to feel loved, accepted, and validated? And this is probably where some of the first beliefs around who you were and how you need to show up in the world started. And this is the seeds of perfectionism were being planted all the way back then. Okay, so let's just diagnose now how perfectionism shows up as adults. So it shows up as adults, this relentless need to constantly self-improve. Perfectionists never feel like they're ever good enough. There's always a destination in the future where we're going to be better, we're going to be skinnier, smarter, more accomplished, more successful. And a lot of entrepreneurs experience this. It's like, where I am right now is not good enough. I will achieve perfectionism, a perfect version of myself in the future. So there's a lot of future thinking that takes us out of the state of being present. We're very busy. So perfectionists actually have a very activated nervous system. Perfectionists can't sit still. And there's a belief, if I constantly keep myself busy and doing things, if I'm constantly, studying courses, setting goals, striving to achieve them, I'm going to start to feel better about myself. So perfectionists don't know how to rest. And a lot of perfectionists end up burning out, specifically in your early 40s. I'm now in my late 40s. I've had several burnouts. And a lot of women come to me for senior leadership, executive coaching. Even when I teach my spiritual courses, my awakening program and my channeling. I'm a medium, a psychic medium. I teach people how to channel as well as how to be high performing executives, because this was my life path. A lot of them come to me when getting through a crisis. So the crisis was their perfectionism got too much. I'll come to how we address our perfectionism in a little bit. There's another several other ways to diagnose. Nothing we do is good enough. It doesn't matter how successful we get or when we achieve our goals. Happiness is very fleeting if you're a perfectionist. So you might get that board report off, or finish off that Excel spreadsheet, or finish off that graphic design, or if you're a mother of kids at home, you've completed the dinner and the house is looking clean and organized, but there's this feeling of, but I'm not good enough, and it's still not good enough. So being happy within feels very it's never there for me. So as a perfectionist for many years, I was never happy. I pretended I was externally, but I would walk around miserable because my self-talk was highly negative and very critical. And again, a bit like the childhood diagnosis, I had criticism in my childhood as a hypersensitive child. I took that voice and internalized it. We would never speak to ourselves like that as adults. The critical voice is an internalized voice from an external critic that we experience in our childhood or teenage years. And it could have been a parent, a primary caregiver, a teacher, someone of authority. And we took that critical voice as real, and then we internalized it. And perfectionists tend to talk quite unkindly to ourselves. And, we would never speak to a friend that we cared about like that, yet we would speak to ourselves like that. So being a perfectionist, we can be quite unkind to ourselves. Perfectionists constantly feel under pressure. It's like there's this pressure that never eases up. Okay, so perfectionists struggle to unwind on weekends, go on holidays, really relax and have fun. And having fun and resting is a sign that we're healing trauma. So when you're first starting out on healing the perfectionist trait, we're going to have to address trauma in the childhood. And one of the signs you're overcoming perfectionism is you're resting and you're playing and you're laughing. Perfectionists really laugh. We don't have access to laughter. We're always scared of the next thing that could go wrong, right? So can you see that? And another thing for extreme perfectionists is we feel like we deserve punishment when we get something wrong. Yeah. Can you imagine what that feels like? So if we're a really high perfectionist, we'll do something. We might make a mistake that seems very reasonable to do, yet we will feel internally like we need to be punished, a bit like the childhood experience. So there's a cruelty to ourselves when we're perfectionists, and we're actually blind to it. I was blind that I was doing this to myself for decades until I had a crisis. Now, I found that if we don't address our need to get things right all the time, the universe will make us by giving us a cataclysmic fail of epic proportions. I've had many of those. And so the universe has forced me, I would say, in many respects, to address my perfectionism by giving me failure, by causing me to have errors and problems and I had to sit in the shame and humiliation of making a mistake. One big mistake I made was when I was the commercial manager at Random House Publishing many years ago. I was in charge of sales and stock management for 50 Shades of Grey. And this book was flying off the shelves. You might remember we sold, I think, 120 million copies globally were sold of 50 Shades of Grey. And back then I was probably at the peak of my perfectionism. I could not make a mistake. I worked hard. I worked my team hard. And that's another thing with being a perfectionist. We're not just perfectionists to ourselves. We put the same pressure on everyone around us. And I know I did this to my team. I was really a taskmaster. I was very tough and difficult on them. And so we were running out of stock of 50 Shades of Grey. And I remember the executives had me in a board meeting, and I recall saying confidently, we should reprint 250,000 copies. So we reprinted 250,000 copies of this book. We put it on a ship in the US, and it was bound for Australia. It would take 6 weeks to arrive here. And a week later in the Australian market, 50 Shades of Grey, the sales of 50 Shades of Grey came to a staggering halt. They actually stopped because we'd saturated the Australian market. You see, Amazon and ebooks had just started coming in, and in our enthusiasm, we'd put so much stock out, we'd sold every copy. And I didn't see this coming. And so when that happened and the sales of 50 Shades of Grey stopped, and we had 250,000 copies on their way to Australia. Well, this was my mistake and my failure. This was my $1 million error. See, up to that point, I had been such a perfectionist. And the universe was saying, we're going to give you a big failure, Sheila, so you can address your perfectionism. So you might have had a crisis in your career. Think back to yourself, or a crisis in your relationship. If you're people pleasing your partner and you're trying to get things right all the time, the universe will actually create a cataclysmic failure to make us stop and address our perfectionism. I had to address that I was a bully at work. I was unrelenting in my standards. I had spent no time with my family or friends. I needed to stop and take stock of my life. And in that moment, after that failure, that $1 million mistake that I made, my life started to change. And I actually stopped being the perfectionist that I was. And it started 10-year journey of me becoming so much more kinder and gentle to myself. So look at maybe the perceived mistakes or catastrophes in your life, in your career, as the universe giving you a course correction to address your perfectionism. Because when we're perfectionists, it affects all parts of our life. And let's talk about them now. It affects relationships. We become antisocial when we're perfectionists. At work, people can sense that we're competitive. They can sense that we're putting pressure on ourselves and will possibly put pressure on them. We're rigid in our ways. Perfectionists really want to feel like they're in control. That's the way we feel safe in our body, is by feeling in control. And we have an energy field that extends out from our physical body. And so that energy field of a perfectionist is frazzled, it's high intensity, and people that come into contact with us can feel that. And it's not pleasant to be around. We might experience envy, competitiveness as perfectionists. So that's difficult to create intimacy. It's difficult to become close to a perfectionist, because at some point we might feel like we want to compete with people, or we might project our high standards on our families and friends around us. And they think, I don't want to have that kind of high standard sort of projected onto me. The other things that it can affect our time management skill. So with being a perfectionist, ironically, while we're highly productive, it comes from working long and exhausting hours. We're not overly productive because we procrastinate a lot. Perfectionists procrastinate. We don't want to feel shame. We don't want to feel failure. So the minute we think we might fail something, we might get it wrong, we stop doing it and we start cleaning the house or distracting ourselves. So perfectionists procrastinate. We ruminate on the day. So at the end of the day, walking home, getting a bus or train home, we will reflect on the day and we'll think on all of the things that went wrong during the day. So can you see what an impact perfectionism has? It's not just a mindset thing that we kind of grapple with daily and can overcome. It's actually a learned behavior. It's a created habit that we need to work to undo. The other way I've seen perfectionists get stopped in their tracks and need to address it is through manifesting physical illness. So because perfectionism is all about worth, there's a lot of elements around stomach or gut issues, irritable bowel syndrome, migraines, neck tension, nervousness, exhaustion, and for me, fertility issues later in life, premature aging, it takes its toll on the body. And so at some point, if we leave our perfectionism unchecked for too long, the universe will make sure we address it through a crisis, through getting sick, through a breakdown in our relationships. And this is what happened to me. And in some ways, I needed to re-look at my whole life after that $1 million error with 50 Shades of Grey. I started to leave work on time and spend time with family and friends. So perfectionists, we have lives that are out of kilter. We put all our energy into one thing where we feel perfect, and we won't invest in maybe relationships or slowing down or hobbies. It was around that time when I started to get more balanced, that I started to leave work on time. I studied spirituality, yoga, meditation, And I ended up becoming a spiritual teacher many years later because of that mistake all those years ago. I was forced to address that I'm not taking care of my mental health. I had to apologize to my team for putting them under that kind of pressure, right? And so I ended up feeling better about work. We ended up feeling like a team again. So with perfectionism, we might need to go through a crisis to break the back of it. That might be one way the universe helps us get through it. Look at your life. Have you had to have a crisis to address the need that you need to get things right all the time? That's actually helping you to, address something that's not working for you anymore. The other way is you might get a coach or a mentor. I coach a lot of women that are senior leaders or want to get to their first leadership position, and I get them to address the costs of perfectionism. So you might want to write down 10 costs of working as hard as I am, of canceling on friends at the last minute. I'm going to the movies or doing yoga with them. The costs of not dating and putting all your effort into work, and you'll end up dating the year or the year after that. Like, dating is something that you delay because being perfect at work might be your focus, or you might be perfect at home with your kids, and so you have no social life, there's no balance, you feel like you've lost a part of yourself. Okay, so write down the costs. The more costs you write down, the better the more you're going to feel of the impact it's having on you. So the point of this exercise is to go, wow, this is really having a massive impact on me. First exercise to overcome it, journal exercise. So do this in a morning. It could be a morning exercise that you do. It takes about 30 minutes, okay? And then you're going to just meditate on it through the week. So the first is, what are the costs? The second thing to think about is, what are the benefits? How am I benefiting from being a perfectionist? Does everyone praise me? Do I feel great about myself? Have I been getting pay rises? Do all my friends in my children's school think I'm wonderful and pay me compliments? Because we're keeping up a facade that's burning us out slowly on the inside. And we've got to go, is that really worth it? But you've got to get present that we're doing a behavior because it benefits us, okay? The third step is, if I stop putting all my effort into my kids, or all my effort into my career, or all my effort and energy to be perfect into my business, my side hustle, where would I take that effort and energy and put it into? What part of our life is being really underrepresented, underdeveloped? Is it fitness and well-being? Is it great nutrition? We're rushing to buy takeaway food. We're not having time to cook for ourselves. Is it love? We've been single for many years and we're thinking, wow, I need to put some effort and energy into romance and love. Or is it having baby? We've been delaying fertility plans because it's never the right time, because we're striving to be perfect. This was all me for many years, okay? So one of the biggest parts of it is to create a vision. In my coaching group, in my programs, I've got a program called The Brave Woman. In that, I get women to create a vision board, a visioning tool. And this is not like any other visioning tool. There's an actual structure to the way I teach it. But fundamentally, it involves all parts of your life. No part gets overlooked. So health and well-being is there. Family is there. Friends and connection is important. Love, having some form of love and deep relationships is important. So one of the ways we overcome perfectionism is pulling our energy out, extracting it from the thing we're over investing in, and we put it into the thing we are under investing in. Now, this is going to be challenging. It's a pattern interrupt in your life. It's not the way you've been working. You might need a mentor or a coach to do this. Reach out to me if you'd like me to support you in one of my programs, or find a group, a soul tribe around you. Find a group of women and you can confide them and saying, hey, I'm trying to make these big changes in my life. I don't know how to get out there and date. I've been working long and exhausting hours for so long, I don't actually know how to start. Or you might be a mum with kids at home and you've lost your social circle, and you might need to confide in some people and go, I don't know how to get out there and just create time to socialize. Can you help me? So asking for help on how you adjust your life away from perfectionist into a much more balanced life, where more cups are full is not going to happen overnight. These are changed habits and behaviors. I found for me, my perfectionism, it's not that it's gone away. I just handle it so much better. I brought humor in. I laugh at myself. And fundamentally, I've stepped into a more feminine version of myself. And I used to hate when people said, tell me, become more feminine, because I was just rolling my eyes and I was very in my shadow masculine, right? And I never understood what they were talking about. I always liked the way I was turning up in the world because I was so successful. And I thought, why would I want to be feminine? How is that going to help me? But I had to go through burnout, exhaustion, the shame of failing to realize slowing down and taking care of my mental health and having beautiful, loving connections in my life was going to give me the richness in my life that was missing. When I was a perfectionist, a chronic perfectionist, I did not realize what was missing. I did not realize there was a richness in my life, of love, of connection. That I could create a vision of marriage and relationships and children and so much love, because I was so focused on me. It was a very narcissistic, self-centered time. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like I said earlier in this podcast, most of this is conditioning from our childhood. We're taught it's not safe to be imperfect. It's not safe to make a mistake. And so we become conditioned to get things right all the time. Now, as adults, we can blame our childhood all we want, or we can take responsibility for who we are as adults and how we show up in the world. Okay. So I hope this podcast has helped you to address perfectionism. I hope it sheds some light. I hope you felt it very honest. It's an honest account of perfectionism and how self-centered perfectionism can be. But also you can start to address it slowly through changing our habits, our rituals, our mindsets. If you want to work with me, or if you want to understand a bit more about myself, go ahead and grab a copy of Brave. I definitely address perfectionism in there. And please share with me on Instagram, DM me, how you're addressing perfectionism and how it's impacted you and where you are now with it. It's been wonderful chatting with you today. Big love. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. I love you. I'm filled with gratitude for you. I honor you for choosing you, your personal growth, and your evolution. Thank you for letting me into your world. It has been a privilege. Now do me one favor, one big thing. Share this podcast with a soul sister or brother who needs to hear this. My mission on planet Earth is to help as many people as possible so we can be bold, be brave, and be courageously ourselves. I'll see you on the next episode.